Today I'm going to be reviewing the Topping DX7 Pro Plus. Now, to the best of my knowledge and what I'm being told is that this is an Oppos and Topping collaboration, and it's only available on Oppos. I'm not sure if that will change in the future, but it looks to be that way right now. Oppos, the audio store, did send this out for review, but as always, they have no input in this review. So without any further delays, let's go ahead and jump into this. Now the build is great. I am a huge fan of the new Topping design styling with the rounded edges, the more oval look. I think it looks really nice. Now what these designs don't do is scream built by the gods, just amazing build quality for the money. When you kind of pick it up and handle it, they're fairly lightweight. They're clearly not using crazy dense materials or anything like that that would feel extremely high end, but I really like the design of it a lot. This design probably looks pretty familiar because it's almost identical to the smaller DX5, which I've reviewed before. This design is just a little bit more wider and a little bit deeper than that of the DX5, but otherwise is pretty close to identical minus the inputs and output options. I do have a couple complaints about the build though. One is that this volume dial, well, on the DX5, it seemed fair enough for the price range. It's really not that great compared to some other higher end Dac Amp options from Topping. This has sort of a notch style design for the volume knob, but it's not a super satisfying click like the DX3 is, where this sounds awesome. And it's also not quite the smooth, more lush feeling volume dial that is on something like an A90. So it's sort of this in between, and it kind of feels a little bit cheap at this price range. The DAC chip inside of here is an ES9038 Pro chip. This is sort of one of ESS's flagship DAC chips. That is hard to say, by the way. I say that like 5 times fast. This is also shared with something like the D90, which is a DAC that I've had for a very long time and like a lot. It's also featured in some really high-end DACs like the Matrix X Saber, for example. Now, compared to its older sibling, the DX7, which had a different chassis design than this does, and slightly different internals, this is actually a big step up in some measurements and power specifications for both the DAC output and the headphone output. So it's good to see an improvement there within its own naming kind of classification. But when you compare it to some more modern DAC amps like Topping's own DX5, which I'll compare to in a second, a lot of the specifications are pretty close, though this does win basically all of them. The amplifier that's coming out of the headphone output is, of course, Topping's NFCA amplifier, which, if you don't know, is a very, very clean version of an amplifier style. They measure very, very well. A lot of people, including myself, like the very, very neutral sound signature that they provide. Now, into 32 ohms, this thing will put out about 2 watts. Into 300 ohms, it'll put out about 300 milliwatts. There's kind of two sides to this. This is just enough power to be considered pretty much good enough for almost every headphone, but not some of the outliers. Some of the really demanding planars out there, like Susvaras, HE6s, things like that, are probably gonna want a lot more juice than this. Some of the Abyss headphones are gonna want more stuff than this, but the vast majority of headphones will work. However, at this price point, and given how well the other DAC amps in Topping's line kind of perform for amplification, I was really hoping for more power out of the headphone output of this thing. And it does make me wonder if they're making a conscious decision to stay on top of the measurement game and forsake a little bit more power than some of the competition has. I do, again, wish this had more power, but at the same time, 320 milliwatts into 300 ohms is gonna power pretty much anything at that impedance. 2 watts into 32 ohms is definitely gonna power anything at that impedance. But at the end of the day, unless you wanna go with separates or individual units, most of these Topping amps have about the same amount of power, so it's not a massive bump in power compared to its brothers and sisters. Now, while this DAC does have a ton of diverse features and functionality, most of the access to that is hidden behind the remote, and I'm actually starting to really, really dislike this. Couple problems with this remote system. One, you can get more of these remotes very, very cheaply from Topping, and they should work just fine with this. However, they're not really marked with any sense of logic. Now, it does work, but you can't look down and figure out, okay, M, what do you think M would mean on this? I have no idea. I still don't even remember. I'd have to press a bunch of buttons and figure out what I'm trying to use in order to fix this. But a simple fix to this, and while I do appreciate having a remote,
and wouldn't want them to take it away, is just to add kind of system controls on the device. I think that would be easy.
For the amplifier section, I think that this thing is actually quite enjoyable to the ears. I tested on heavy planars, I tested on some dynamic headphones, and IEMs actually. I found IEM performance on this to be very, very good. I really like the latest line of the Pro Plus line. I feel like both the DX3 Pro Plus and the DX7 Pro Plus performed really well for even extremely high-end IEMs, like the for M5s that I have. The noise floor is non-existent, but mostly the dynamics seem proper and they don't seem overly jumpy. It also doesn't have a shiny top end. It's got a very confident neutral tuning like the rest of the NFCA stuff, so no surprise there. But when you go up to bigger planar headphones, for example, the Edition XS, I felt like this had plenty in the bass response department, which was something that I have felt like is lacking for certain amplifiers in the past for that headphone. But this also has that exacting scalpel of a top end that we're used to seeing with the other NFCA amps. Now, one of the additional features of this is a sound mode, which can switch between just basically off, which is no sound mode, and then transistor sound and tube sound. Neither are super convincing, really, but you know, they're there if you want to play around with them. Now, if you need to drive heavier, more demanding planars, I do think separates are going to be the way to go for those. I do feel like having an A90 around, which has dropped down to $400, and a good DAC might even get you cheaper than this. You could get a balanced DAC like a Modius and the A90 and come in cheaper than this. And you're going to have tons of power, but you're going to lose some of the all-in-one features that you get with this. You're going to lose the remote control, a couple things like that. I don't think the Modius has Bluetooth either, and this does. But for specific users, that is absolutely going to be the correct decision to make. For other users, something like this is going to be the correct decision to make. Also, as a brief side note to all this, a lot of people in the A90D review were wondering what DAC I was using. This hadn't been officially announced yet, so I couldn't say, but I was using the DX7 Pro Plus out of the balanced outputs. So for your purchasing options, I think there's going to be a lot of questions about the DX7 or the DX5. I don't think you should get the DX5. I really like the DX3 Pro Plus, and the reason I like this is because it's basically the same as the DX5, and in my opinion, it sounds the same as the DX5 and has just about the same power output as the DX5, but it doesn't have balanced. I honestly don't think for the DX5, it's worth jumping into balanced for that amp DAC specifically. Here's what I would recommend getting. I would recommend, if you want to go cheaper, this thing is about $200, which is a screaming deal for the DAC amp that it is. I think it's one of the best for that price. I would either get the DX3 Pro Plus or the DX7 Pro Plus if you're looking to get into a balanced system specifically. Now, outside of power differences, both of these sound very close to the same. Very, very, very close. And the price difference probably isn't going to be worth it to most users, even though the DX7 is better. Now, when it comes to the DX5 versus the DX7 Pro Plus, I don't know. The DX7 is just a better amplifier. It's a little bit more versatile. You have a few more options. The DX5 is great. It's just not a very appealing option for its specific price tag. It kind of hits in this weird territory where I think you should either go cheaper or more expensive. Okay, so my conclusion. For whatever reason, the past couple days, I've had this really big reflection point on the world of audio. And it's not that this device is leaps and bounds ahead of its predecessors. It is better, but it's kind of been the slow incremental increase in capability, spec performance, sound quality for DAC amps like this one over the past, 10 years, basically. Honestly, it's really impressive how good these things are getting, even at really cheap prices. But it's kind of awesome how much progress these things have made when you look at the big picture and just how good even an average DAC amp is right now. These things can get really impressive. So is this thing worth your time? Well, I do think so if you're in the market for this specific feature set, the build, design, and this price tag. I think if you just needed a DAC amp, I still think that DX3 Pro Plus is the way to go for about $200. That is a screaming deal in my opinion. Personally, I would get either that one or the DX7 Pro Plus. I don't think I would go for the DX5. It's a very good unit. I feel like there's not enough to justify the price between the DX3 and the DX5. So while I do think you need to be kind of a specific user to desire something like this, I do think that this will make a few people very, very happy. Okay guys, thanks a lot for watching. See you guys next time.